So up until now, we've considered models that ask the question, given that prejudices against certain groups of people exist in society, do market interactions serve to eliminate those prejudices, or can they serve to reinforce those prejudices? But in all the models we've considered so far, the prejudices themselves come from some source other than market interaction that we haven't thought about too carefully. In this last model, which comes from a paper by Basu, we're going to consider the possibility that market interactions might themselves generate prejudices or generate discrimination under circumstances under which it's productively optimal to have some group of people be favored in certain types of market interactions. So the argument here is that when ordinary people engage in market interactions and learn from their experiences about what is and is not profitable, the result can be prejudice and discrimination. So the big picture of how this can happen, how this can work, is that in some circumstances, your best choice when you're deciding who to work with or support or partner with is to partner with somebody who's going to be able to get the support, cooperation, and partnership of other people. So let's imagine that you've got a friend who's in a band, right? And your friend comes to you and says, hey, I would really like you to direct our band's music video. We're creating a debut album, our first release. And if you do it, we'll give you a share of the money that we make on our first music video. So you might think your friend's music is really, really great. You might think that your friend's music is really, really bad. But your likelihood of making money off of this interaction isn't just going to depend on what you think of your friend's music. It's also going to depend on whether you think that your friend's going to be successful in getting other people to help them with their project. Right? In other words, if you think that there's lots of people who would love to provide guest verses for their songs, or lots of producers and promoters who are going to really like their music, or lots of venues that are going to want to book them, all of that is going to make you expect more success from them, regardless of what you think of what they're doing, and therefore be more willing to cooperate with them. So in other words, the fact that other important players might want to invest in your friend's band is going to increase your willingness to invest in your friend's band. And likewise, right, when those guest artists are deciding whether to spend their time producing a guest track for this song, they're going to be more likely to do it if they think that your friend's band is going to be likely to find a good director for their music video, or good venues to play in, or good producers and promoters. And likewise, the venues are going to be more willing to book your friend if you think they're going to come with good guest artists and come with a good music video and all this sort of stuff. So for each person in this exchange, right, all of the people in this ecosystem, they're all going to want to have the same set of preferences and tastes as the other people in that ecosystem. And if as a result, the fashion of the day is that grunge is hot, or trap music is good, or people really want danceable pop songs, everybody's going to want to jump on board with that trend so that they can more accurately reflect, so that the people that they want to work with are going to be able to get more support from other members of society. So how is this going to relate to discrimination? Well, what Basu is going to show is that in these contexts where you're better off investing in somebody if you expect other people to also invest in that person, racial prejudices or gender prejudices or other things, they're going to lead you to conclude that one race of people or one gender of people is going to be more supported by other members of society than others, is going to lead you to want to jump on board with those stereotypes or jump on board with those types of discrimination. So to understand this, let's think about a very, very simple example where we've got 4 startups in some city, right? So 4 startups in East LA, all of which are building network infrastructure. And Occidental College is trying to decide which startup to use to help improve their IT system so that we can all use Blue Jeans a little bit more effectively. And also, you as a venture capitalist are trying to decide which of these 4 companies to invest in, right? So if you as an investor invest in the startup that wins the Oxy contract, you're going to end up making more money, right? Because they're going to have this massive customer, they're going to have big orders come in, they're going to be a lot more successful. So you're going to want to invest in the company that's most likely to get a contract from Oxy. And likewise, when Oxy is deciding who they want to hire to rebuild their network infrastructure, they're going to want to hire the company that's most likely to get an investment, right? Because a company that gets an investment is going to be able to scale up more quickly, is going to be able to hire more people, is going to be able to use better tools, and as a result is probably going to build a better product, right? And so Basu summarizes this by saying if you've got X is the return to investing in different companies, and Y is the return to investing in the same company, we just need that Y is greater than X, right? To say that Oxy is going to be better off and your investment firm is going to be better off if you pick the same company. Okay. So now let's imagine that there's 4 companies, right? There's 4 startups. 2 of these startups are run by men, and 2 of these startups are run by women. And you and Oxy both can make a decision about whether you're going to choose the startup to invest in or buy from without reference to gender, or whether you're going to discriminate in favor of one gender and against the other gender. So we can think of this as a simultaneous game, right, where Oxy is deciding whether to be gender neutral, discriminate in favor of men, so only hire from one of the two, male-founded startups, or only hire one of the 2 female-founded startups. And you as an investor are making the same decision, right? Invest in a gender-neutral way, invest in the male-founded startup, or invest in only a female-founded startup. And let's say to simplify, right, we said the only assumption we need is Y greater than X. To put some numbers on this, we'll say that you and Oxy both get a return of 2 if you invest in the same startup, and you get a return of 1 if you invest in different startups. So let's imagine that both of you decide to be gender neutral. In this case, your expected return is going to be the likelihood that you pick the same startup times 2, plus the likelihood that you're going to pick different startups times 1, right? So that's going to be 2 times 1/4, right? Because there's 4 startups. You're only going to pick the one that Oxy picked 1/4 of the time, plus 1 times 3/4, 1 times 3/4, which is going to equal 5/4. Right, so a return of 2 1/4 of the time, a return of 1 3/4 of the time, so an expected return of 5/4. And likewise, Oxy is going to get a return of 5/4. Okay? If you're gender neutral and Oxy decides to only choose a male investor, you're still going to get a return of 5/4, right? Because they're picking between these 2 male-founded startups, but you're going to pick a man half the time and a woman half the time, so you're still going to end up picking the same as Oxy 1/4 of the time. So 5/4 and 5/4. And likewise, if you're neutral and they pick a female-founded startup, right? And same thing here. If either one of you is gender neutral, the return is going to be 5/4. Now, what happens if you decide to discriminate in favor of male founders, and Oxy also decides to discriminate in favor of male founders? Well, in this case, instead of picking out of a pool of 4 startups, you're really only picking out of a pool of 2 startups, right? The 2 startups that are founded by a man. And so instead of picking the same startup as Oxy 1/4 of the time, you're going to pick the same startup as Oxy 1/2 of the time, right? So your return is going to be 2 times 1/2 plus 1 times 1/2 equals 3/2, right? So your return will be 3/2. Oxy's return will be 3/2. And of course, it's exactly the same if you both chose to discriminate in favor of women, right? You would still be picking out of 2 startups, so you would still pick the same startup half the time. And on the other hand, if you just discriminated in favor of women and Oxy discriminated in favor of men, you would pick the same startup none of the time, you would get a return of 1. So if we think about the Nash equilibria here, it's very straightforward, right? If I'm going to be gender neutral, then it's going to be fine for you to choose any of these possibilities, right? All of these are going to be exactly the same. all of these are going to be exactly the same for me. Right? So my best move, if you're gender neutral, is any of these options. Right? Your best move, if I'm gender neutral, is any of these options. I'm sorry, I messed this up. Sorry about that. My best move, if you're gender neutral, is to do anything, right? All of the options are going to give me the same return. Your best move, if I'm gender neutral, is going to do anything. Everything's going to give you the same return. But if I'm discriminating in favor of men, and you knew that I was discriminating in favor of men, you could either earn a return of 5/4, 3/2, or 1, and your best move is going to be also discriminating in favor of men. If I'm discriminating in favor of women, likewise, your best move is to also discriminate in favor of women. And, for the same reasons, if you're discriminating in favor of men, I'm going to want to discriminate in favor of men as well. If you're discriminating in favor of women, I'm going to want to discriminate in favor of women as well. So what we're going to conclude is the Nash equilibria will be all three choices where we match each other, right? Where no one discriminates, where we both discriminate in favor of men, or where we both discriminate in favor of women. And what this means is the equilibrium where nobody discriminates is incredibly unstable. The minute one of us starts favoring men over women, the other one is going to realize that they're going to do better when they hire male-founded startups than when they hire female-founded startups, and they're going to start discriminating as well. And we'll end up rushing into an equilibrium where everyone discovers that men are more productive than women in certain jobs, everyone hires men, and then everyone has a reason to hire men. For the exact same reason, if somebody started discriminating in favor of women, everyone would notice that women were more productive than men in these jobs, and everyone would shift towards women. And of course, in the real world, if instead of just having these two actors, right, with this very, very simple choice, we had a bunch of very complex interactions with lots of different people making decisions about who they were going to invest in and who they weren't going to invest in, it would be very difficult to disentangle this sort of social effect, right, this effect that the reason that men are more productive than women or women are more productive than men is because of the fact that one group is a recipient of positive treatment by others and the other group is a recipient of negative treatment by others. It would be very difficult to distinguish that from a story in which one group is just intrinsically more qualified or more capable than the other. The other thing to note is that the equilibria where discrimination occurs aren't just stable, they're also better for everyone, or better for productivity, than the equilibrium without discrimination. In other words, in a context where it's beneficial for everyone to coordinate their resources to a handful of people, having a defined elite can actually increase output. So whereas in the Coate and Lowry model, right, we were wasting the talent of black workers by not letting them be engineers, in this model, we're actually going to need to give up some amount of output or productivity to move into an equilibrium without discrimination. I want to say a couple more words about these models, and then I'll let you go about your days. So the first thing is, if we think about the model that we laid out here, this doesn't exclude the Coate and Lowry model. In other words, if we find ourselves in a situation where male-founded startups are consistently favored over female-founded startups, we're also going to find ourselves in a situation where the economic returns in investing in your skills to be good at founding a startup are going to be higher for men than for women. In other words, this Basu style model, this focal point model, can lead to a Coate and Lowry style equilibrium as well, where once this discrimination takes place and once it becomes established, members of the marginalized groups end up becoming, in fact, less productive in the areas where they're marginalized. And that means that shifting from one equilibrium to another can be incredibly difficult. Another thing to point out is that whereas in the Coate and Lowry model, we had this sort of negative self-sustaining feedback loop that could be broken with a single one-time intervention, right? A single dose of affirmative action could result in everyone realizing that there were no actual productivity differences between groups other than the ones induced by discrimination, and thus end prejudice forever. In this model, anytime we're at a point where there's no group-facing prejudice, we're always teetering right on the edge of going back into a discriminatory equilibrium. In other words, because in this model, discrimination is productive, because it limits the set of people in whom we invest these sorts of elite positions, discrimination can only be avoided with constant, costly effort. So if we started with the Becker model, which is this sort of joyous, positive story about market capitalism leading inevitably to an elimination of unfounded negative stereotypes, we're ending with a model where unfounded negative stereotypes can be an almost unavoidable facet of market interactions in the cases when it's beneficial for people to agree on who's the elite and who's the underclass.